Bienvenidas al podcast Dos Bold Latinas. Aquí están sus hosts, Jatnna
y Josibel Madera Vialets, dos latinas feministas born in Santo Domingo y in New York.
Passionate about Latina empowerment, Spanglish,
learning, growth, and so much more.
Hola, mujeres. Today's episode is really special and emotional to me because I am finally sharing my experience with pregnancy loss, specifically my journey with having experienced a molar pregnancy in 2021. Ever since I experienced the loss, immediately after, I felt the need to share with more women about this difficult journey that many of us go through, but it is hard to talk about it most times. I knew I wanted to share and educate others, but I just wasn't prepared to do so until now. So today, Rosie will be asking me some questions about my experience with molar pregnancy, and I am hoping this information is relatable to other women, that you can learn more about the topic if you or someone ever have to endure something similar, which I truly hope no one else has to, but we know it is really not up to us. But before I turn it over to Rosie, let me provide the definition and cause of a molar pregnancy so that you have a better understanding of the term in general as we have this conversation today. So, a molar pregnancy is a very rare complication that happens when the tissue inside the uterus becomes a mass or tumor. And when I say very rare, it's because it normally happens in 1 out of every 1,000 pregnancies. So there are two types of molar pregnancy. There's the complete molar pregnancy and the partial molar pregnancy, which is what basically happened to me. In a complete molar pregnancy, the placental tissue swells and appears to form fluid-filled cysts, and there is no fetus. And then in a partial molar pregnancy, again, what happened to me, the placenta might have both regular and irregular tissue, and there may be a fetus, but the fetus cannot survive. The fetus usually is miscarried early in the pregnancy. And then in this partial molar or incomplete molar pregnancy, the mother's chromosomes are present, but the father basically supplies 2 sets of chromosomes. So the embryo then has 69 chromosomes instead of 46. And this most often happens when 2 sperms fertilize an egg, resulting in an extra copy of the father's genes. So with that explanation, I will now turn it over to Rosie so she can lead us through this chat today.
Hola, mujeres, and thank you, Jatnna, so much for having the courage for this, because I would say I kind of know, because I was just thinking, I feel like it's gonna be like that time again. I would ask you many questions. I mean, I would try to go on Google. I'm like, pregnancy, and I looked it up, but I would never get to the point of knowing how you felt inside. So I honestly feel like I'm even gonna learn more about it today.
Yes.
So let's start out with, if just you as how can you share a little bit of us, your personal experience with a molar pregnancy? Like, what were some of the signs and symptoms that led you to seek that medical attention? Like, I remember you saying, like, you just didn't feel something right about it. And I mean, I didn't understand, but I was like, wow, like once you told me, I was like, that is so right, because I saw your tummy growing. I remember even saying in your Christmas picture, like, you're glowing. We didn't even know you were pregnant. But anyways, let me not go into that. But I'm like, oh my gosh, this is all coming to me again. So
yes, so in 2020, I want to say it was December 2020 when I finally found out that like we were expecting baby number 2 at the time. And it was weird. It was very weird. And and I understand that, like, when people say like, oh, your pregnancies will be different, like, I get that. Like, obviously I have a second child now, and it was very different, but I feel like at the time it was really, I felt like something was really odd. I first didn't know that I was pregnant, but I knew that something didn't feel right. So I originally went to the doctor just to check on, like, hey, like, I spoke to my OB at the time and I said, hey, I just want you to, take a look at, let's talk about what's happening right now. Just because I feel like, we started trying a couple of months ago and nothing's happening. So I specifically went to that appointment, not because I was pregnant, but because I wanted to get pregnant and I wasn't pregnant yet. And so I asked her to, like, hey, can I get an appointment? Because I really need you to see what's going on. It's been taking a while this time around. And so I went in, they checked me and she was like, hey, I mean, I know you're here for, for us to discuss this, not getting pregnant yet, but you're actually pregnant. And I'm like, no, that's impossible. And she said, yes, you are pregnant. And so, they gave me a test. Obviously it was positive. Then they started to test my hormones essentially, just to make sure that, like, yes, it was an actual pregnancy. And, that at that appointment, she just sent me, home, and she was like, I'll see you again in, we'll do an ultrasound maybe in a couple of weeks just to make sure things are going well. And then, I'll see you for your 12-week appointment. And so I don't know, I came back home, but I still didn't feel like, it just didn't feel right. Like, I had a lot of pressure in my pelvis, like just unusual pressure essentially. And it just hurt really badly, which to me, like, I mean, when you're pregnant, I know it hurts, but it's not like to the point that you're like, oh, like, this is bad, like really bad, like it hurts. So, I reached out again. They're like, okay, 2 weeks later, like, let's just see where the pregnancy is and see like what may be happening. So I got an ultrasound. I think at the time I was like, I don't know, supposed to be 6 weeks, but then when they did the ultrasound, nothing showed up, period, on the ultrasound. So they were like, okay, maybe it's too early. So they sent me home again, and it still continued to hurt. Like, I had a lot of pressure. It just really, really hurt. And so they were like, okay, come back in 2 weeks and let's see if there's something there. And so I went back. Yes, there was something there. They checked. Everything seemed fine at the time. There was something there, but they couldn't confirm that it was actually like at the time they said like, oh yeah, I see. Yeah, it's a fetus, like a baby, or at the time wasn't a fetus, but like there's an embryo, like we see it there. And then they're like, but everything's fine. And I'm like, yeah, but I still don't feel okay. Something, it's, not okay. And they're like, no, we just gotta wait. Sent me home again. And I just kept, living my life as usual, but I just wasn't feeling myself and it just didn't feel right. And then, we went back again for my 12-week ultrasound at the time. Like I feel like time just flew by, but I still didn't feel comfortable, like physically. I was just feeling like, I don't know, like very nauseous all the time, which is not normal for me because I didn't have that with my first pregnancy or now with my pregnancy last year. So to me, it was kind of odd. And then we went into that appointment and, I requested that she checked pretty much everything just because it just didn't feel right. And yeah, long and behold, it wasn't right. When she, tried to look for the baby's heartbeat, she didn't find anything. So she requested that they bring in one of those old machines that you could do an ultrasound on, essentially. And then she took it. She tried to see if like something was happening or baby was, I don't know, like maybe not in the right place. And then, yeah, she found something like a lump of something. It wasn't even like a baby yet, more like a mass, kind of like how I explained before. And she was just like, I just see a lump of something there and he has no heartbeat. So like, I don't know, like I think something's wrong. And I was like, I had shared this with you. Like, I didn't feel right. And so from there, obviously, like they did like another ultrasound just to check that it was exactly, like that literally where there was nothing there, that like whatever she checked, that it was like a lump of something. And yeah, they found out that like it could be something really bad. So she mentioned that I needed to get like to the hospital the next day. She was like, I'm going to schedule you right away, because I don't want you to, it could be something really bad. And I think we need to get that out right away. And I can't tell you what it is because we will have to test it afterwards. And so that's when basically everything happened. And so obviously, like, the back and forth is how I was like, I need to seek medical attention, essentially.
And this is where I would throw that plug in, that when women feel that something's off, it's
Mhm.
like we know our body best. Yes. I mean, all respect to medical attention, but whenever you still feel like in your gut something's not right, you
You
keep
should push it.
advocating for yourself, because sometimes we're like, oh no, this everything is fine, but we know our body best. And right now you just gave that testimony.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, once you receive that diagnosis of the molar pregnancy, like, how did you feel emotionally? Also, like, what first came to mind? Like, like sometimes there's something like, oh my gosh, that's the initial thought. And like, what other concerns started going through your mind through the process?
Well, so at first I had to basically come to the realization when I was there at her office, where she said, like, there's no baby there. Like, essentially, there's a lump of something in your uterus, and I need to take it out ASAP because it will be risky for your life. And so we schedule I know there may be a question about this later, but we schedule a DNC, which is a procedure where they take everything out of what the residue, so like whatever is left in the uterus, they take it out just to make sure that like nothing else bad happens to you in your health, essentially, once they find out that there's you've lost a pregnancy, essentially. And because at the time I was 12 weeks, essentially, or the lump was 12 weeks, they needed to literally take me in and take it out right away, just because it could have been really bad for my health. And so at the time, obviously, we didn't know that it was a molar pregnancy, because she was just like, I can't tell you right now what it is. But when we go through the process tomorrow of removing it from your uterus, then we can test. I can send it to the lab, and then they can test to see like what may have happened, or what was the cause of this mass or this lump of whatever you had in your uterus. And I was like, okay. And she asked me, like, would you like to do that? And she was like, I'm not gonna push for you to do this just because like this would be additional money. And so it did cost more money for us to understand, like, if we wanted to test it, it would be additional money for us to understand like what exactly is what happened in this case, and how could I don't know, I prevent it next time, if that's even possible. And so I say, you know what, I don't care, that it's gonna cost additional money. Like, what if it's something really bad and I don't, and I don't know, and so it causes more problems down the road if I want to, try again for a baby. And so she was like, yeah, it makes sense. So let's go through the process. And then once I get everything out, we will send it to the lab, and then I'll get the results, and then we'll talk about it. I'll personally call you, and we'll talk about a follow-up and like what the results look like, essentially. But obviously it wasn't like, at the time, I want to say I wasn't really emotional, just because I was fearing from my life at the time, because I was just like, damn, like I wanted to have a baby, and then I ended up like, yeah, like I lost this baby. And then they're telling me like it wasn't even a baby, it was like a mass or whatever. So at this point, and it could affect me and my health or whatever. So at this point, I wasn't even thinking about like, oh, I lost the baby, I lost whatever. Like, I was just more like, how am I going to get better? Like, how can I get it to the point where like I need this out of me, so that I am able to continue to stay healthy, just because like I wasn't at the right space at the time or mind to think about, to grieve, essentially. It was more like, let's get this done, and then we'll see what I do afterwards, essentially.
Let me just go and ask this question before I keep talking more. I'm like, oh, this is all bringing stuff back to me. So with that, of you didn't have the time to think about it, you were grieving. So I'm sure it was also a little bit confusing for family and friends to really understand what's going on. They're like, I personally remember like, okay, so was there really like a baby loss? Was this just something that your body
Mhm.
reacted like you were pregnant, like all their hormones, but then there really was no baby? Because me personally, like I didn't even really understand it. And I remember talking to you like that's how you at some point you also felt. So I mean, this question is also to educate women out there that even though like sometimes you don't understand it and it's harder to even tell family because you really don't understand it. Like, can you help like give us your testimony and like how did your family and friends react to the news of your molar pregnancy and like were they even aware this existed or did you have to explain it to them? Which I'm sure you probably had like a copy and pasting porque I'm sure you went through a lot of explaining. So let's help these women out there um,
Yes,
learn
for
from you.
sure. So once I went through the process, right? Like they took everything out of me and then it took about a week. They sent it to the lab. Then, she called me back, obviously, with the news, like, hey, I wanted to my OBGYN, right? So she called me like, I wanted to follow up because remember we talked about sending the tissue to the lab so that we can understand better what happened. And so she was like, I am so sorry to tell you that this was a partial molar pregnancy. And if you guys remember, I explained at the top, like in the intro, kind of like what it was. And with a partial molar pregnancy, essentially, like I said, it was a mass instead of a baby that formed in my uterus. And then that mass essentially was created by two sperms that fertilized the one egg that I had. And so it created an excessive amount of chromosomes essentially. And so it just couldn't create like an actual baby. It was literally like a mass. And so when she explained that to me, she was like, this is very rare and I haven't seen this in a long time. So I need to do some research on my end. So even my doctor, was already like, let me go back because I haven't seen this in a long time. Like I've treated this back in the days, like in my whole, my entire time being an OBGYN, I think I've only seen this once or twice. And so I need to go back and confirm like what the updated data says about, molar pregnancies in general, and then specifically you having a partial molar pregnancy. And so let me do my research and then I'm going to follow up with some documents so that you understand what it is and what we need to do moving forward. And so, okay, I was like, okay, that's fine. And she was like, we do have to do some follow-up testing because I don't think you will be able to try again, to have a baby just so soon. We're going to have to do some testing and we have to follow up. And then I will let you know when you have the green light to essentially, resume with wanting to have a baby essentially. And I was like, okay, at that point it kind of sounded like, okay, this sounds more, a lot more complicated than like, okay, you lost a baby and then like wait a couple of months, get your period and try again. At this point she's like, we need to do follow-up testing because this mass could also contain cancerous cells. And so you could get cancer out of it. And I was like, say what? And so she was like, yeah, so that's why I need to follow up and do some testing because we want to make sure that you don't get cancer out of this, essentially. So when you ask about, I got the diagnosis, I understand, I understood what it was. Like I read it a million times because I knew that people would ask me, like about it, at least the people that like family and friends, like you mentioned. So it was really hard to explain to people. They were like, oh, like, yeah, pregnancy loss. And I said molar pregnancy. They're like, oh, and they're like, what is that? Because that doesn't sound like a common thing. And I'm like, yeah, it's not. And so like you said, if it was text message, I would have to like copy paste, like, okay, this is what it is and this is what happened. And even when I shared it with, when I felt more comfortable with people and I shared it with other women, like, hey, yeah, like I also experienced a loss and was a molar pregnancy. Like, again, nobody ever knew what it was. So they're like, oh, like, so can you explain a little more about it? So I don't think it was frustrating to me, honestly, like having to educate people about it. Actually felt really good to me to be like, yeah, I think people should know about this and people should learn that this happens. And I know that there may be other things out there, right? That women go through, like other kind of complicated pregnancies that they go through. And so there may not be a lot of information out there about it. So like if I have the knowledge and I went through it myself, why not share it with people? So at that point, I just felt like, you know what, fine, like I'll educate people. And maybe one day, if something happens to someone close to them or even happens to them, they'll know more about it and they'll be able to know, like, hey, I know someone who went through that. So let me connect the two of you so you guys can talk about it, essentially. And so, it felt fine to me to, share with them what it was. And I actually, like I said earlier, like I felt the need to at some point use our platform as, for our podcast as Dos Latinas to share with other women what that is and just explain to them and educate them about the topic, so that if they ever go through something like this, they kind of know where to go to get, resources essentially.
Well, thank you for becoming a valuable resource to all of our mujeres. And earlier you mentioned DNC, and I'm just like, I don't even know what that is. And here it says dilation and curettage, but I'm like, that still doesn't tell me what that is. So, because molar pregnancies often require medical interventions, and that was one that you had. So, can you describe your experience with the procedure and how was that recovery process?
Yeah, so the next day, so when I went to, obviously, like I mentioned, that she was like, "Yep, we got to get it out of your body because it could be health related. It could damage your health and your health, and things could, it could just go wrong from there." Even though she didn't know that it was a molar pregnancy at the time, so but she rightly so made sure to get it out of me essentially, and so the procedure, like you said, a DNC, it's basically dilatation and curettage, like you said. And so what they do is that I specifically, and this happens a lot. It doesn't have to be just for molar pregnancies, to be honest. I know it's a procedure that is given as an option to women that have had like a regular miscarriage. And they, and it can happen up to, if I'm not mistaken, it can be offered up to 12 weeks, essentially. So like if you lost your pregnancy or you miscarried prior to, up to 12 weeks, you are able to get this kind of procedure, essentially. And so I know that a lot of women are given the option to either go that route where the doctor extracts the tissue and everything inside your uterus with like it's like a spatula and a suction. I want to say like a suction vacuum type of thing. So they try to scrape around your uterus, like all the residue of the pregnancy, essentially, all the tissue and everything, and then they suck it out of you, essentially, and then that's then it stays empty. And then it goes back to, I was 12 weeks at the time. So like my uterus was a little, like a 12-week size mass, obviously I had. And so they make sure to extract it. And then like, it takes time for your uterus to like, shrink down to its normal size again. And then obviously like you bleed for, I don't know, like a couple of maybe 1 to 2 weeks, essentially. And then I was put down, by the way. Like I don't think at that point, I think they don't really give you an option to just like do it that way, just because it's painful. And also like, it's just something you don't want to be up for, while they're doing it. And so they put me under. So I was under anesthesia the whole time, and it's a procedure that only takes about 30 minutes or so, essentially. And then I think they use a camera, essentially, also just to make sure, like an ultrasound. They do another ultrasound just to see where the tissue is located at the time, and then the doctor then goes in and then like extracts the tissue, and it comes out, and then they basically, you come back from, anesthesia, and then they give you antibiotics, obviously, and then pain medications just so you can feel better. And then you bleed for about a week or two, and then you're not allowed to do like, like heavy lifting or just a lot of walking for the first, I want to say, couple of days. But afterwards, then you could just, and then you're not allowed to use, I mean, this is a lot of TMI, but if if you're not interested in this, obviously you don't have to continue to listen to it, but you're not allowed to like insert stuff, in there because it could cause, bacteria and all an infection or whatever. So they ask you to not wear like tampons or, like the cups, the little cups that you could put like when you have your period. So like they ask you to just wear maybe like a pad for about 2 weeks up until like you're, already feeling better and you're no longer bleeding from the procedure essentially. So that's the process essentially. And I think that after the procedure, that's kind of when you feel like already like, okay, then I'm no longer pregnant at that point, essentially. And so that's when, your mind starts like wondering, and then you start thinking about like, okay, what happened essentially? And that's kind of what happened to me.
Okay, so it sounds like it was the recovery was more of that mental and emotional versus physically. Because I remember seeing you, I don't know, it was that same day or day after. Y yo te vi como si nada. I was like,
Sí.
didn't you just go, like, you're explaining this. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it hurts just thinking about it. And I saw you. So that's why it's like sometimes when we're like, be gentle, be kind to people out there, because por
You
fuera,
don't know.
physically, you don't even know what they could have just gotten in the past 24 hours. So if you would have never told me, hey, I got this procedure done, and I would have seen, and the way I saw you, I would have been like, oh, like nothing's going on with Jatnna at all. Porque yo te vi igualita, but you had gone through all of that in the past 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so earlier you mentioned like, oh, when your doctor told you, oh, this mass could be cancerous. And I also was like, when you were like, I was like, man, like what the heck is this? Like besides a loss, you could get cancer for this. It was like a double slap in my face. So I could just imagine like when you heard that, because I was like, oh, like, y esto, like is, as you said, like it's not very common. So since these type of pregnancies have that risk of developing a GTN, which is a form of cancer, how did you navigate the aspect of, that journey? And was there any kind of follow-up care that you started to receive to make sure that you didn't?
Yeah, so she once she delivered the diagnosis to me, and she kind of mentioned, hey, like, just so you know, I want you to be aware that, like, I know the first thing that comes to mind for women that go through a loss right away is like, when can I try again, essentially? And which, she's like, which I understand, which it's a valid question, but she was like, for you, this is a very risky complication. So I do have to follow up with you and then make sure that your hormones are going back to a normal level, or just like literally to zero, down to my pregnancy hormones at the time. They need to go back to zero. And you basically have to come into the lab to get your blood drawn every week, the same day every week for the next couple of months, just to make sure that your HCG is going down to zero. And then after that, we will do monthly follow-ups just to make sure that it's still at zero. Because what would happen is that if your HCG does not go down to zero at all, and you still have the pregnancy hormones in you, it means that you did develop cancer, and then we will have to go through therapy, like some sort of like chemotherapy in my uterus, like for my uterus, to ensure that we can get rid of the cancer cells, and then you are able to then try again at some point. But she didn't really specify when exactly that would be and how long it would take. So I was like, okay, fine. And obviously, rightly so, I asked her, like, okay, but what are we thinking though? She was like, the research shows that you should stay away from, we should follow up. and we should stay away from getting pregnant right away so quickly for about, I don't know, 6 months to a year. And so that was hard for me because I was like, okay, so I'm trying to have a baby. I lost the baby or whatever happened, right? Like then I developed this thing, and then now this thing was taken out of me, but it could turn into cancer, and then I can't even try to get pregnant again for like a whole year probably up until we can see. And that is if I don't get cancer out of it, because if I do get cancer, then I do have to treat it, with chemotherapy, and who knows how long that takes. And then after whatever, how long that takes, then that's when I'll think about, if I can continue to have, get pregnant again. So it was hard. It was a difficult and emotional state of mind to be it, and honestly, and information. And so it was hard. It was very difficult. So I was like, okay, fine. Well, let's just start with the process and see where it goes. Let's not think, she did say, like, let's not think that far. Cause I was already asking her, like me, the planner that I am, like, okay, if this takes this time, this amount of time, and then if I do get cancer, like what are what are the next steps? And so she didn't want me to get ahead of myself. So she was like, let's first monitor you for the first couple of weeks, and then we'll see where you are. And then if it does get to the point where you do develop the cancerous cells, then we will talk about that, at that point. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, essentially. Which I love the fact that she was very, for a doctor, essentially, she was very positive and more like, no, like, well, let's take it one step at a time. Let's do this first, and then we'll go. If we get to that point, then we'll talk about what needs to happen then. So, that's why I love my doctor, because she was very, even though things could get worse, she was very positive and more like, let's leave them in the moment. Let's see what happens. And then we'll go from there, essentially, rather than getting ahead of ourselves. And so for me, luckily, we did the testing, we did the follow-ups. I didn't get cancer, by the way. if you're wondering, like, what happened? Like, you see, you're telling the story, but like, did you get cancer out of it? And so luckily I did not develop cancerous cells. It did take me 12 weeks exactly for my hormones. So for my HCG, my pregnancy hormone, to go down to 0. So for 12 weeks in a row, I went to a lab to get blood drawn to ensure that that hormone was 0, essentially, or went down to 0. And then from there, I did do 2 monthly follow-ups, just to make sure that I was still at 0. And so the hormone didn't come back up. And that's when, she basically gave me the green light to actually try again for another pregnancy, essentially. So, but just know that this is something that could happen. However, there is, I think it's only 1 to 2% of women that do have a molar pregnancy develop the GTN, so the cancer that Rosie had mentioned earlier. And so, luckily, I wasn't one of those 1 to 2%, and it did go away. I never got the cancerous cells, and it took about the whole journey, I want to say, from the time that I lost a pregnancy to the time that I was clear to try again to have another, or to try to have another baby, was about 4 months in total. But then again, I do want to make sure that, you understand that it could take longer. This was just my case, and how, how I worked with my OB, and how, she treated me, and how she made sure that, I was ready, and she actually felt comfortable with letting me, go ahead and try again for another pregnancy, just because, for 4 months she followed up and nothing happened, everything stayed clear. And so that's how we got to the next, to trying again, essentially, after 4 months.
Well, glory to God that you did not get that GTN
Yes.
cancer, and for putting that doctor in your life that I honestly felt like he was speaking to you, to her. That's my personal opinion.
Agreed.
And I know earlier you were talking about how you didn't find it difficult or frustrating to explain like what the molar pregnancy is in your experience. But in that process of you educating others, were there any misconceptions or stigmas that you encountered? And if so, how did you address them?
I definitely did. And I think a lot of women that I don't think this is related to molar pregnancy specifically, to be honest. But I think one of the misconceptions and a stigma when you talk to people about, when they ask you, like, oh, when are you going to have a second child or your next baby or whatever, they don't know that you have experienced a loss essentially. And so when you do share that information with them, their reaction would be, oh, okay, that sounds, like you had a loss. And again, like once you go into the detail, like, oh, but it was a molar pregnancy and this is all that happened to me. So no, I can't try for a baby right away. So the misconception and the stigma is that it'll be fine, like try again and it'll happen, whenever it happens essentially. So I don't think people understand how like not sensitive. You know what I mean? It is for them to tell you like, hey, like for you to share with them, like, hey, I just literally had a loss. So obviously, like I'm not gonna like just try again. And they don't understand that, like, okay, I could try again, but what if this happens again? You know what I mean? Like they don't understand how difficult it is for you to go through such a traumatic journey and process for them to just say like try again and it'll be fine. Because and I feel like this is something, it's not just like a general thing. Like I also felt like, and whatever, if we would have been the general audience or people population, whatever, telling me like people that I don't talk to on a normal basis essentially, or like they're just acquaintances or just like just like regular friends, whatever, like it's fine, like they don't know any better. But like when these things come from your family members, when they mention those things and they just tell you like, oh, it's fine, you'll be okay, try again later. Like coming from your parents specifically, because that came from my parents a lot too, where they were like, yeah, that's unfortunate that it happened to you, but you're still young and obviously you've already had one. So just, try again whenever the doctor says that you should try again. So to me, that was very insensitive to tell me like just go ahead and try again later when I'm trying to go through this grieving process, which is so difficult for me because I'm trying to be strong, internally for my family, for my husband, and for myself. But for someone to come to me and tell me like nothing, like just try again, like if it was like nothing happened and I didn't have sort of like a baby in me, for 12 weeks or whatever, even though, it might have not been a baby, it wanted to be a baby. But for someone to say that to me, I think it's very inconsiderate. And so those are the misconceptions and stigmas that we have to kind of talk through, about with people when they ask you those kind of questions, because they don't know what you're going through. And I feel like, and I don't think it's bad for someone to ask you, like if you want kids at some point, or like if you want to try, if you're trying for a baby, like I don't think it's bad, like it's not malicious if someone's asking you, but I feel like it has to be done in a way that it's not so insensitive per se, because you could ask like, hey, I don't know what your situation is, if you really want to know, right? Like I don't know what your situation is, but like are you guys trying like to build a family or whatever? Like if you really want to know, that's fine, but you gotta be cautious on how you ask that question essentially. And so you don't know what other people are going through, and so having to saying those things, and I know there's a lot of million other things that people say honestly to people that have experienced a loss that's not right at all, to just for someone that just had a loss, that like, oh, you have, don't worry, you're young, don't worry, try again, like if nothing happened. Like there's a lot of million things that people say wrong, that I understand that happened, that we need to be more cautious about moving forward, just because you don't know, like you said, Rosie, right? Like you don't know what someone's story is or what has happened to them in the past. And you don't even know if someone like this is like a loss, right? But what about someone that like it has infertility issues, right? And they've been trying to have a baby for years, but they haven't been able to, succeed at it. So like those are questions that are sensitive to us certain people. So people need to stop assuming and need to be a little more considerate. And when someone shares with you that they had a miscarriage or that they had a loss, like you could just be more like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. I really hope that you get to have the, at the end of the day, like I hope you get to have the kids you want to have or whatever, instead of like, you'll be fine, just try again. You know what I mean? That's so insensitive. Like just be like, yes, I understand. I'm so sorry. And I wish you, whatever. So those are the things that we have to be a little mindful with. And so the things that I encounter and that I had to educate people about when I was sharing more about my experience with pregnancy loss and specifically molar pregnancy.
Yeah, and I can imagine how many people told you, "Oh, you're strong. You'll get through this." Like it's something like that, because that's how most of us are, like, trained to be that. Oh, we're strong, but it's like you still gotta, ¿cómo se dice? Like still acknowledge that there's that feeling and there's that emotion, not to dismiss it. And I feel like that's what tends to happen a lot. Like, oh, that doesn't matter. Like dismiss it. No, like let's just embrace that. And yes, we'll get through it, but not be dismissive of the emotion. And honestly, like after you went through that, because I if I have been close to someone that's had a loss, I would not know of it. But after you went through that, I was like, wow, that's when I went more Instagram stories and like the stories you would share. I'm like, I even have to think about being sensitive when I ask a question. Or even when I would say, oh my gosh, I got pregnant so easily. Like I even have had to change that wording because I didn't think of how that could affect others. Like I only was thinking about myself, my process. And that also increased awareness to me of like, how I even share my thing, because it's like that's a trigger for someone. They can be like, well, lucky you, bitch. Like you got it, but I didn't, like so
I
it's
love
like
it. I love that you're saying that because, and I hope that with you saying that, other women that haven't experienced any of this and have had your experience essentially, where they're like, oh, I had it was so easy for me, the one, the second, the third, whatever, how many times they had a baby, like that's great. But I think, and that's great for you. And nobody, and again, no one that has gone through loss, like it's like, personally, like it's not like I'm envious. It's just that, wow, like that's great for you that you didn't have to go through what I went through because it was difficult. But don't be don't be super insensitive about it. Like, yes, like be cautious of how you share that or how you say those things, just because not everyone has had the same end result or the same, it was as easy for them to actually get to where they are today. I mean, imagine there's a lot of people that have to go through like tons of losses before they get the first child, or whatever, however many children they have. Imagine like the IVF process, the like even surrogacy process. Like there's so much out there that women have to like think about to be able, when you have infertility, that you have to endure for someone to come and tell you like, yep, I, like you said, like that was so easy for me. And then they're sitting here like, okay, then I suck and my body doesn't do what it needs to do and we're not the same. Not everyone's the same. And so there are some of us that are less fortunate, so that's why you got to be very sensitive. And I love that you're sharing that. And I hope that other women that have not gone through those, through that journey, like understand how to approach, something like that moving forward when they talk to people that have experienced losses, essentially.
Yeah, it's a learning process. And again, I'm glad that you're here to educate us. And speaking of education, Um, like, what advice would you give to other women who have been diagnosed with a molar pregnancy or going through a similar experience? Like, are there any resources or support groups that you would recommend? Like, what did you do to get those resources? Because I know, I mean, I mentioned social media. Like, I feel like that was your major support system of finding a community out there that's similar. So, can you share a little bit about that?
Of course. So I think that for molar pregnancy specifically, there's really not a lot of resources out there, to be honest, just because it's so rare and only very few, like I said, 1 out of 1,000 pregnancies ends up in a molar pregnancy. So not a lot of women experience this. However, yes, it happens because obviously it happened to me. So there are some resources out there. I really had to dig into the internet and do my research to see, like, okay, like, are there groups for this? Are there websites that talk about how you could cope while you're going through the process of, like, yep, I have to go and follow up and can't do anything, like I can't even get pregnant. So like that, your mind spirals a lot when you can't do anything. This is out of your control, and so you want something so bad that it's really difficult for you to stay focused and not think about, oh my god, like, when can I actually start practicing, like to have this baby, essentially. And so it's hard, it's really hard. Like, those 4 months, like, it sounds short, but it was really long for me to, like, not be able to try and have another baby, essentially. So the things that helped me the most was, and this is more not necessarily for molar pregnancies. Like, yes, I did the research, I went in and found some websites, and obviously, like, I'll try to link all those resources on our description box for anyone that's interested. But I think in general, there are a lot of resources out there that, like, just general, like, pregnancy loss resources, essentially, that you could, there's groups out there, like, literally specifically for women who have experienced pregnancy loss. And they are, most of them are free, actually. And just like you said, Rosie, like, so there's Facebook groups. There are, I found a Instagram hashtag, essentially groups, like through hashtag molar pregnancy, or like hashtag partial molar pregnancy. I was able to find women that actually had experienced a molar pregnancy, and so I decided to follow those women and to see their process and their journey, and see if they actually, the end result actually made me happy, because I was like, okay, did this person get, I mean, that sounds bad, but, like, did this person experience cancer, like, out of their journey, and they had to wait longer and do, they do the chemotherapy, or did this person, like, actually their hormones went down to zero, and then, they were able to resume and they actually had a baby right after. Like, those, I had both, right? So I try to follow people that, through Instagram, right? Like, that actually had both experiences, like someone that had the journey, because I was going through the journey, but I didn't know where my journey was going to end, or where, whether I was going to get cancer. I wasn't going to get cancer. So I follow people, women that had both experiences, so that I could see what it would be like for me to go through those process, either one, whether it was the one with where I ended up getting cancer, or the one that where I end up not getting cancer and then try for a baby right away. So those are resources that are, that you can find on Instagram. You can find hashtags. Literally, there's a hashtag for everything in social media, especially on Instagram. Like, you put hashtag pregnancy loss, hashtag miscarriage awareness, hashtag, there's just so much. Whatever you're into or you're looking for specifically, just find that, just put that hashtag on Instagram, and you will find lots of profiles of women who have gone through all those things, and it will be beneficial. So, but what I will say, though, is that don't get too into the spending a lot of time, though, on social media, because I think the more I spent time in social media, like, living, yes, understanding, like, what the journey was for those women, I think the harder it got, because then a lot of the stories that I follow, or the women that I follow, didn't necessarily end with like a baby per se. Like, yes, they had more, like they went through a molar pregnancy. They they didn't get cancer. Okay, they were cleared to try again. And then yes, they got pregnant, and then boom, they lost the baby again. Not necessarily through molar pregnancy, but through something else, just like a regular miscarriage or anything, anything along something along the line. So that was a trigger for me, because then I would compare myself to those, to those women essentially. And then in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, like whenever I get clear and then I get to try again, like, what if that happens to me again? Like, what if I lose the baby again? So like, I think you have to manage it so that you're not always like trying to compare yourself, but just using the resources just to help you cope through the process. And so going through social media like kind of help a lot, but again, it could be bad too, because then I ended up like comparing myself, so that wasn't good. So I had to like step back and think about like how I wanted it, wanted to manage that. And then I also honestly, through my process, I seeked God a lot. Like, I literally printed out, how we always mention that we put together a vision board essentially every year. Well, I created a quote board essentially with what I wanted in the process, or what I was looking forward to, or like quotes from, like the Bible, verses from the Bible that would remind me of how good God is, and that at some point within the right time, God will provide, and he will, I will get whatever it is that I am in need, or whatever it is that God thinks that I should get essentially. So I literally created a whole board with like Bible verses, and that helped me through the whole process a lot. I also created, I'm just like giving you guys everything that like kind of helped me go through this process essentially for the full, well, more than 4 months, right? Because I ended up being clear for during after 4 months, but then then the time that you actually try again, and then actually to get pregnant, it's also additional time, right? And for me, like I said before, I did end up getting pregnant, because some of you have seen my daughter. She's 6 months old, well, 7 months old tomorrow. And so yes, my ending was, thankfully, thanks to God, he provided. And then yes, my ending, like end result, I did get my daughter literally the year after, so last year. But through the process, like it wasn't like, oh, 4 months, you were ready to resume activities and try for a baby. It wasn't that, it didn't happen fast. Like, it took another 4 to 5 months for me to get pregnant with my daughter essentially. So we're talking about 8 months in total there. So, or like a whole year, right? Like, if we count the whole pregnancy too. So I also want to be cautious, right? And mindful that there's more than just the waiting time is a lot longer than sometimes what we think. So I also created a playlist on my Spotify, which I also sometimes still listen to it, to be honest, because it just reminds me of the time that I was going through that, and how God was so good to me. And then I ended up with with my baby. So I always, every time I felt some type of way, or remember what I went through, I would literally just listen to that playlist, and it would like kind of like help me, think about like, yep, it again, trust God and things will be fine. And then obviously doing my due diligence. Like, it's not like I wasn't, obviously we were doing what we needed to do for it to happen. But additionally to that, like, I had those other resources that were helping me. And then manifestation, obviously, like, I was always positive about putting it out, in the world. Like, oh, whenever, when I do have a second baby. So like, manifestation is really important. And I want to say, number one thing that helped me through the process too. You want to guess what was it, Rosy? And we talk about it all the time. What did I get?
The that we talk about it all the time.
Yeah, for mental health.
The therapist.
Yes. Ding, ding, ding,
I
ding.
was like, there's a lot of stuff I could think about, like your journal, or like the la cosa que tú ponías en tu barriga also, or like
Yep, yep.
the app to process that. I'm like, there's a lot of stuff you haven't mentioned yet. Que say that? Okay, thank
Yep.
you for
So,
that.
yes. So the number one thing that helped me the most too, like, yes, like Rosie said, like I did a bunch of stuff that like I could list for you guys, honestly, but I think it's gonna be based on your, you know, like your personality and what you believe in and all those things, right? So like it would be personal to you. But I think the number one thing that helped me through this entire journey was my therapist. My sister, I want to say the whole process without getting a therapist, to be honest. Because my sister was like, you say you're fine. Because I kept telling myself, like, I'm good, I'm okay. But then randomly, like, I would see, you know, social posts, like social media posts about like someone having a baby and like, or a loss, or like I was just randomly thinking about my loss. And then like when those things happen, like she's like, you haven't really grieved, essentially. And I think that is something that we have to do before we move on to like being ready to even try again for another baby. I didn't do that a lot. And so my sister literally referred me to a therapist. She was like, you have to get a therapist. Like, you guys know, my sister, Loana Abreu, she's a therapist, and she obviously can't do therapy on me because that's unethical. Even though, like, yeah, we talked a lot and she was super supportive. And like, I thank her so much because she always kept me like in line. She kept me positive, and she kept reassuring me and giving me like all these other tips as a sister more than a therapy. But I think therapist, but I think because she's a therapist, like she can help, but you know, provide those resources, even though she shouldn't. And but she referred me, and I found a therapist, and I saw my therapist like for the time that I was trying to conceive for the second time around, and then through my entire pregnancy last year. Because talk about pregnancy loss, and like once you get pregnant, like woof, that's another topic of its own that we could talk about. But once you go through a pregnancy loss and you get pregnant again, like all those thoughts stay with you. And then the thing that you're always constantly thinking about is that, what if this happened again? What if I do lose this baby again? So that was always in my mind when I was pregnant with my daughter last year. So a therapist actually helped me stay, you know, like positive, stay, you know, think about do the things that I was supposed to do. Because because I had a pregnancy loss and I was pregnant with my daughter last year, I had I was holding back in a lot of things that I was doing. And Rosie can attest to this. Like, I didn't share my pregnancy with anyone, like other than like family and friends, whatever, like up until, oh my God, I was like already midway through my pregnancy. Right?
Basically, basically until you couldn't keep hiding it with your big shirts and your big blazers, and I'm like, and
Yes.
then summertime came and it was like, okay,
I couldn't anymore. And so, you
yeah,
know, like I was like because I had the loss, like a lot of the
the
pregnancy,
joy,
the joy,
you didn't get to
exactly.
enjoy it. Yeah, you weren't
I
really
didn't.
like happy. It was just like you didn't even want a baby shower because you were scared. So it's normal.
Yes,
Like you were like, so you didn't want to get like the enthusiasm, and then you like I don't know. This is how I saw. You didn't want to let yourself down again. So
agreed. And so all of that happened. But my therapist, you know, like obviously like Rosie and my sister and like those who surround me and I talk to on a daily basis, obviously always kept me positive and just like, no, yes, let's do this, let's do that. And they were the ones who kind of like kept things going and made things happen. You know, with their support, like I actually like was able to do, you know, more of the like, yeah, like a baby gender reveal, whatever, for the second, finding out that I was having a daughter, and or having like a sprinkle, right? Like a mini baby shower, like those things, like I was able to do because of the people that were surrounding me. And because my therapist was always there for me and always just walking me through the process. So that's the number one thing I would obviously recommend everyone. Once you go through something like that, it is imperative that you get yourself a therapist, because it is difficult and you have to let yourself grieve, and you have to be able to do this with support, and more so than family and friends, you need to be able to do it with professional support, essentially. And so again, number one thing, but then again, like, social media, but I mean, be mindful of how you use that, obviously, just because it could go both ways, right? Where like, yeah, it can help you, but also could be detrimental if you start comparing yourself, to others, other people's journey. And then like Rosie mentioned, I also had a journal, obviously, that I bought. She actually, Rosie actually purchased, like gifted me a journal, a pregnancy journal. And then I was able to write down a lot of those things on there. And so it was more, and I had a routine, obviously. And I had like those quotes or Bible verses, like literally where I could see them around my house, that would remind me, like when I was frustrated about the process of like, oh, why can't I get pregnant this time? Why is it taking so long again? And all those things, like I had a Bible verse for like the way I felt, sometimes throughout the process of trying to, go through the journey of molar pregnancy, but also like through the journey of like trying again to have, to actually end up having a baby, essentially. So those are the things that I essentially recommend.
Thank you so much. And honestly, like I give you props for going through all of that, because you were able to manage of like how to take care of yourself, like even though you still have your son and being a wife, all these responsibilities, but you did take it a priority to take care of yourself mentally and doing all of those things, because that was like an extra job. I don't know if the right word is job, but it was like one more thing added to your plate, and you were very intentional about that. So just want to close it out with saying thank you so much for sharing your story to educate all of us, and especially for women, so they don't feel like they're alone in going something similar to this. Because the more and more I learn, I'm like, women don't open up about this. And there's a lot of women that you may know, I may know, whoever's listening may know, that could have gone through some type of loss, and we're not even aware of it until someone opens up, like, oh, really? I went through that. And it's because of that. We're just not taught to talk about it, or like, oh, it happens, I'll just keep trying. And that's where that mental health really is important. So thank you for putting an emphasis on that's the, after God, the most important thing of like help, giving that help. And also, like for all of us listening, like to myself, I'm still also learning on how it's a sensitive topic and how to reframe my questions or approach to people, like, when are you going to have a baby, or like, y el otro pa cuando, because that's like what we use, especially in Hispanics. And yeah, it is something very sensitive. So I'm even also still learning. And I just want to close it with saying, check out those resources that Jatnna will put in the link, because even if you may not be going through this, you could know of someone, or eventually down the road, and you could be helpful also, just by knowing a little bit more or sharing that. So highly, highly encourage you to go and check out these resources that Jatnna will be linking in the show notes. So thank you so much for joining us. Leave us let us know in the comments if you're listening on Spotify, like if you have anything, or you even have any questions for Jatnna. I know that she will be happy to reply to you in the private DM, or even in the private DM on Instagram, now that I think of that, since it could be something sensitive, or a review on Apple Podcasts. So thank you so much for being with us, y cuídense mucho, y hasta la próxima. Ciao.